Welcome to this conversation on the new Biden era and its opportunities for Nordic businesses. My name is Anu Partanen and I will be moderating the event today. We have several distinguished panelists here with us, and we've divided this event into 3 consecutive conversations. We'll start with Joe Biden's climate and energy policy. We'll follow that with a discussion on tech policy. And finally, we'll discuss how to brand Nordic businesses in the United States. First, a few words to the audience. You can join in by sending comments or questions to our panelists in the streaming window. So you're watching the streaming window. Next to it, there's a column where there's the program. Underneath the word welcome, you'll find a little Q&A box. If you click on that, the comment box will open and you can type in questions and comments. And I will be able to see them here in my iPad, and I will bring them to our panelists. So we're definitely hoping that you join and have a conversation going with one another as well. Okay, let's get started with our climate policy discussion. First, I'd like to invite to the stage Donna Warndof, Head of Public Affairs for Neste US in the Americas. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you.
And then we have Johannes Urpelainen. Johannes is Professor of Energy, Resources and Environment at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Welcome, Johannes. So, Joe Biden has really made climate policy central to his administration. He had the US join the Paris Accords on day one, and he has promised an economic recovery package that will tie together jobs and investment with new initiatives on renewable energy, on clean technology, on new infrastructure. Donna, so Neste, of course, is focused on circular economy, and Neste is helping clients in the United States to turn waste, such as cooking oil and so on, into renewable biofuels. What are you most focused on when you look at Biden administration's initiatives?
Thank you. There are so many facets. What I'll start by saying is that there's a real optimism around climate policy and this subject, and a real sense of momentum. The federal levels, the administration and the Congress, but also amongst the states. And so that's a change that I think we and others are noticing with the ideas that are being discussed. You mentioned President Biden rejoining the Paris Accords on day one. We're also hearing and seeing with this administration a new or renewed commitment to international frameworks and to working collaboratively and with alliances. And that philosophy spills into other types of policy, including climate, but not limited to climate. So you had mentioned a lot of his proposals for pretty substantial investments in infrastructure and Build Back Better is the name of his plan, but green economy ideas and pro-climate ideas are very much linked to investing in the U.S. economy and infrastructure, and a big emphasis on U.S. job creation. But the overall international philosophy that I was talking about makes that in its implementation distinct from, for example, type policies. Even though there's an interest in domestic job creation, it's less about who will be creating the jobs than the fact that jobs will be created by these sorts of topics and industry sectors. There's definitely an emphasis and a lot of attention paid on electric power generation, electric vehicles, some of these things that we're in the US more used to having the conversations about. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of attention being paid to the other types of policies that are needed to really make an impact in climate policy. And lastly, I'll just mention that the emphasis has been punctuated by this administration so far by creating 2 cabinet-level advisor positions, one for international, which is former Secretary of State John Kerry, and one for domestic policy related to climate, and the commitment to really bring an all-of-government approach. In other words, these liaisons dealing with each of the federal agencies and with the Congress about how pro-climate policies can be implemented across the board in all sorts of sectors, as opposed to making it just one project for one agency. So these are all changes that we're seeing, and it's a very exciting time.
Johannes, what about you? If you look at the big picture of Biden's policy initiatives, what are you focusing on? What do you think are the big shifts or changes coming? Johannes, I think your microphone is off.
Of course.
Now it's working. Great.
Still living in 2020, right? I think the most important thrust of President Biden's climate policy is going to be the 100% clean electricity goal by 2035. That is a very heavy lift. It's only 14 years away, and we don't know what the political constellation will be in the future. Will the Republicans gain back Senate, who will be in control of Congress and all that. But I would say that the clean electricity target is number one. The other one is the Build Back Better program, so investing in low carbon infrastructure and doing it in a way that generates employment. If President Biden is able to secure the support of the House and the Senate to actually make some of these very large investments, that would be a very significant step forward.
And how realistic do you think that is? As you mentioned, so the Biden administration, they can do a lot by executive orders and regulations, but those are not going to be then permanent. You need to have the Congress and Senate vote if you want to have something that is a law that will last for the next 14 years. How likely do you think that is?
I think it's a really interesting question right now. I think there is a decent chance that Biden will be able to pass at least some legislation, because the Georgia runoffs did go Democratic, so he has an opportunity if he's able to get some of the more centrist Democrats to join this effort. So I think it's possible that he will be able to do something, but whether he will be able to steer the country in this direction so that we will see significant progress over 14 years is very unclear, because we did see in the elections that the down ballot outcomes, so the state elections, went still for Republicans, and this is the census time, so there will be redistricting, and I think the Republicans are in a very strong position to retain their political control of many of the key districts, both in the House and in the Senate going forward. So I think it's still uncertain what happens after the first few years of the Biden administration.
So Donna, what does this mean for companies that are planning investments that will go towards 20 years or 30 years or so on? How do you see American companies thinking about this? Do they believe that this is a permanent change?
Well, some very good points were just made, especially about the timing of the political election cycles. So I will say that there is a lot of pressure for the administration, but something to take note for all companies dealing with this government is what is happening in this 2-year time period before the next congressional election cycle. What are the package of initiatives that can be passed this year by this Congress, and then to some degree next year spilling into things like tax policies and incentives, but really what can be done in this 2-year period. And that is likely to be a mix of long-term and immediate short-term goals, to your point, setting the targets for long-term and laying out this big vision, but also what are some tangible first steps that people would be able to see change in activity. And so I would just say this 2-year period really is an opportunity, but there's a phrase in contests around here, must be present to win. Like what it really is an opportunity for companies to be engaged in the process and be very active in that process, because things will move quickly, and the people with good intentions about the policies don't always know what all the options are. And that's the role that companies can play in educating them.
And so in the United States, there's always regulation and funding on the federal level, so Biden administration or Congress. Then there's the states that have a lot of power of their own, and then there's cities. How is climate policy in the United States moving forward? Is the Biden administration actually able to lead the whole country, or are we seeing California doing completely different things than what Texas is going to do? Donna, what do you think?
Yeah, so the states are, we often say, petri dishes of democracy. They try different things and have more flexibility to do that. And we, as you have mentioned, California is already, historically a leader in climate policy compared to some other states. But what we're really seeing is knowing that there will be this support from the federal government in various ways, that has empowered states in this cycle to try some things, to try to look at sort of initiatives. What can they do short term right now that would help this conversation? So, for example, we're seeing more states considering low carbon fuel standard legislation this year than what we have in the past. That's just one example. And then also, as you mentioned, the role of cities. The Biden administration is looking at different frameworks to have projects and partnerships directly with local governments, in addition to whatever they may do with state governments. But this is really exciting, different coalitions of mayors on climate initiatives or regional government type proposals to be able to work with federal agencies, whether it's procurement or a category that I haven't mentioned, but you'll hear it often now with this administration, is looking at environmental justice and social justice issues, and that is best approached a lot of times with partnerships at the local level. So you're seeing that nexus with federal and local policies too.
So Johannes, let's go through some of the different energy sources and what Biden's stances are on those. Obviously, fossils are being phased out, but natural gas is still the United States' largest power source. It's often said that Obama started a war on coal. Is Biden going to start a war on natural gas? What do you see happening there?
This is one of the most challenging areas for Biden climate policy moving forward, because on the one hand, it is increasingly clear that we do need to start phasing out gas. It's not going to be a bridge fuel if we are going to meet the targets to which President Biden is planning to commit the United States, going net neutral by 2050 and all that. But at the same time, again, for electoral reasons, it's very difficult for him to push too hard, because there's still a lot of employment and revenue around this in some of the key states, such as Pennsylvania. So I would imagine that Biden would take an approach that begins with the market movement, where gas will lose its competitiveness, especially in the electricity sector over time, and possibly a lot faster than people thought. And then the federal government would facilitate and maybe accelerate that progress. But I don't see a war on gas. And by the way, I think actually was a war on coal. It was mostly the market that was moving. It was simply not a competitive fuel, and definitely isn't anymore.
And so what is Biden's stand on nuclear power, Johannes?
I think nuclear power remains a fairly minor play today. We haven't seen basically any construction in the United States. There are some next generation technologies that the industry is excited about, and I would imagine that the Department of Energy will support those. But I think here we again are going to depend to a significant extent on the market. So I don't think that Biden is going to make a very big push for nuclear power unless there is a market signal that there's real demand for that technology.
And he clearly has interest in renewable. He has asked his Department of Interior to look into ways to double offshore wind production for 2030. But Biden is also really focused on Buy American. He wants to use the federal government and federal government contracts to buy American products and jobs that are in the United States. If we think about Nordic businesses, and if they're operating in clean tech or in forestry equipment or so on, what kinds of opportunities do you see for them in the United States? And is this going to be a problem that Biden administration wants to buy American? Let's take Donna first and then Johannes.
Well, I would challenge my colleagues to really look at it as an opportunity. And I mentioned before, the questions will be asked: how your business impact domestic job creation? But most likely you have answers for that. Like, consider your supply chains. Consider if you're a B2B company, that your customers are then adding to the economy and job creation, right? There are good stories to tell, I think, for companies in our audience about this. But presenting it, doing the research and presenting it in a way where you're able to answer the question and showing willingness to be a partner in different communities or on different types of projects, that actually will go a long way, and I think help meet the spirit of the initiatives as they work out what the letter of the initiatives will be.
What do you think, Johannes? What are the
I think that sounds right, and I would also add that given that the Nordic countries, even together, are a fairly small group compared to the United States, I think there is a clear opportunity to specialize in certain areas where you already have a kind of a leadership position and you're ahead of the competition. I don't think Buy America means that the federal government would procure low quality products or services from an American company if there is a much better alternative available internationally. And so therefore, I think that in those areas where the Nordic companies have a real competitive advantage, they will be able to do very well, especially given that overall procurement is going to go up very significantly with the Biden administration.
We're about running out of time, but I want to ask, because Donna is sitting in Texas. You're in Houston, Texas, right? And so we've heard lately that a lot of California companies are moving to Texas. Toyota moved already a while ago. Now Elon Musk is saying that he's moving to Texas, and Tesla is building a factory there, and Hewlett-Packard moved to Texas. How is Texas changing? It has been very fossil fuel focused economy. What is happening there now?
All of your categorizations are correct, but Texas has been one of the fastest growing states in the country for a 20-year cycle now. It's one of the prime locations for internal migration and has been at a very rapid pace for some time. And so I will say it's also a very exciting time, or it has been, and these high profile examples only add to that excitement. There are several things that go into a company's decision to relocate, for example. And so always there is the location and what makes available with domestic distribution as well as international. There are relatively pro-business tax policies and sort of government attitude about business partnerships and flexibility when it comes to regulations and statutes. Also, the state passes a 2-year budget. And so certainly for capital intensive businesses, this sometimes makes it easier to plan in partnership with whatever the government policies will be. But mostly I would say on top of all that, and I should mention there's an educated workforce and a big supply of workforce and some of these other criteria that businesses look at when they relocate. But there's also the attitude. Regardless of party, Texas sees itself as mavericks, innovators, independent thinkers, and there's some synergy with Silicon Valley and some other types of industries, for example, aerospace, computer science, some of these areas. So having that cultural attitude, work for your company, seeing ways to be a partner in that way is something I would suggest opportunity for Texas. Now, of course, we all know, and I'm a native Texan, there's a stubbornness that can come with that too. So, the relationships do have to be managed, but I would still say it's opportunity.
Thank you so much, Donna and Johannes. And we will move on to our next topic, tech policy. And for tech conversation, I would like to welcome Robert Atkinson, President at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation from Washington, D.C., and Mårten Mickos, CEO of HackerOne. Welcome, Rob and Mårten. Okay, we're back online. Rob, what are Joe Biden's tech policies and what do you expect to see happening now on this front? I think we're not hearing you. Maybe a microphone is off. Okay, meanwhile, let's take Mårten. If you are, Mårten, looking at the tech and innovation landscape, what do you think is really important for us to understand right now?
I think the general world has for a long time thought that the tech world is a stable industry with certain players and we should expect it to be stable, and the world fails to see that it has grown for the past 50 years and keeps growing. The tech industry is just going to be even more enormous. So when we sort of lazily think that, okay, all the positions have already been played, that's wrong. It's not true. There are lots of new opportunities. That's one thing. The other
Oh, did we lose Mårten now? The technology gods are not with us right now.
somebody muted me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, the system
we can hear
muted
you.
me. Okay. So
The tech
back
censorship is coming.
So the tech industry is growing a lot on its own, but it's also true what Mark Andreessen said, that software is eating the world, which means that some of the best tech opportunities today are not in the tech industry at all. They are somewhere else, in the manufacturing industry, in logistics, in agriculture, in food, and anywhere else, entertainment. So we have opportunities on two types: the traditional tech companies, and then the ones who are not even tech companies but can use technology to build some benefit or advantage that the planet hasn't seen before. So we shouldn't think that tech is now here and we should just get used to it. It will grow even more than before. It will be much, much bigger.
And how closely do you follow the new administration's policies? Do you think they impact the tech landscape, or is this just something that businesses are running?
They absolutely influence the tech landscape, and of course, a public administration will have to balance the interest of all of society. So sometimes it's good for business, sometimes it's bad for business. As a builder of companies, you just look at whatever the conditions are and you do the best within those conditions. So I have understanding for the need to make sure that all of society is doing well and that there's good educational system, healthcare systems, and somebody has to pay for them. But it's possible when such changes are made, or climate changes, that they will short term have a somewhat negative effect on business. But in a way, that's why we're building businesses, to be able to afford the societal services and changes that we need to do, in my mind.
I think we have Rob back with us. Rob, can you hear us now? Yes?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful.
Okay. So if you look at Joe Biden incoming administration and what they are planning to do on the tech policy front, on regulation and so on, what are you most focused on?
Well, one way to think about that is in the Obama administration, there was a honeymoon between the administration and the government and tech. Everybody loved everybody. And in the Trump administration, they started to go to couples therapy. Things weren't working out very well. And now they're heading towards divorce court. And what I mean by that is the Biden administration is going, in my opinion, they're going to try very hard to impose a set of restrictive regulations on technology companies, somewhat modeled, frankly, after what Brussels is doing. We'll see that potentially with privacy. We'll see it potentially with speech on platforms. And we'll definitely see it with regard to antitrust. This is going to be an administration, if they can, that will be very, very tough on antitrust. There'll be a lot more merger review, including with foreign companies. Potentially there'll be higher taxes. But at the same time, the other flip side of that is this administration that wants to spend or invest a lot more money in things like, as we heard earlier, clean energy, but also things like a smart grid, upgrading our health information systems, smart cities, e-government. So that they're going to really want to put a lot of money into technology from a public investment perspective.
And so do you see opportunities for Nordic tech companies working in these areas here, or does the Buy American policy that we talked about earlier impact this question? What do you think, Rob?
Well, I think Buy America is actually more problematic than maybe some people do. Buy America, this is an administration that wants to protect middle-class jobs. That's its top priority. And it's Buy America provisions, which apply not only to the U.S. government, but also to contractors who are using federal funds, I think are going to be quite restrictive. Now, they're not going to apply to a Nordic company who has a facility here. That qualifies. You can still get a contract or participate. But for somebody who's importing something to the U.S., I think it's going to be much tougher. The price premiums that the government's willing to pay for domestic content are going to go up. The amount of content that's required is going to go up. So I think it will be a somewhat more difficult challenge.
Well, let's stop for a moment and talk about the big tech that we all are following. And obviously, as Rob mentioned, the Democratic Party, when the presidential candidates were campaigning, many were actually saying that we have to break up big tech, which typically means Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple maybe. Do you think that this administration is going to push breaking up big tech? And if so, is it right to do so? Are they so big now that they crush competition? What do you think, Mårten?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, so Rob might be the expert here rather than me. But I look back at the 1990s when the tech industry was smaller but much more centralized. Microsoft was truly a dominant player in a way that nobody is today. And Microsoft did not get split up. Instead, within the next 10 to 20 years, Microsoft was outrun and outcompeted by Linux and open source software, by Google, by Facebook, by Amazon Web Services. So you could look at that and say, look, capitalism will take care of itself. If you give it 20 years, there will be competitors who will come in and somehow break the monopoly. And of course, from a matter of policy, maybe that's too long of a time and I can't address that. But I feel that the problem today is not so much the dominant position as it is the fact that we lack rules and regulations for ethics and speech and privacy in the digital world. And when those get exploited in the lack of regulation, then we get this sort of emotional reaction against them and start seeing them as dominant. But they, as enterprises, they are sort of doing what society told them to do, which is build a business within the confines of the law, and the law doesn't state much. But that's my view as a practitioner. Rob may have a completely opposite view. I would love to hear him comment on this too.
Yes, Rob, what do you think we'll see in terms of regulation, and should we see them breaking up or so?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Mårten. I think, first of all, I think the administration will try to do some kind of breakup. For example, splitting off WhatsApp from Facebook. But as you recall, the Clinton administration tried to break up Microsoft, which never made any sense, really, and they failed. And the court, it didn't break them up. They put in place a long-term consent decree to make sure that their operating system was reasonably open so that competitors could interface with it. And that was the right solution. So the Biden administration may try to do this, but what they don't have control of is the courts. There's a long jurisprudence in U.S. antitrust law that's not going to get overturned just because there's some new administration. So they can try, but I don't think they'll succeed. Should they? Absolutely not. I don't know how much you all pay for Facebook in Finland, but I don't pay anything. I don't pay anything for Google. I don't see why I'm being hurt.
You pay with your privacy. You pay with your privacy, Rob.
No, you don't. Facebook, no, you really don't. I'm sorry. Facebook never shares its data.
If you don't pay for the product, you are the product.
No, that's like saying I pay. That's like saying I pay when I watch TV. I don't pay when I watch TV. My eyeball. So Facebook doesn't sell their data to advertisers. They just do a blind match. The advertiser gets to know me, gets to see me. I don't see them, or vice versa, I should say. I see them, they don't see me. But in any case, we will probably pass a privacy bill in the U.S., and I agree that we should have a national privacy law. There are issues there. We'll probably do something on what's called Section 230, which was a law in the 1996 Communications Act that gave not just big platforms, frankly, but anybody who hosts third-party content or comments, even a small website, gets protection under the law from being sued for that nature of that content. We'll probably reform that, but I don't think we're going to get rid of it. I think the other big issue, though, is really that the Biden administration has put racial justice, really, it's a permeating issue for them. It affects everything they do. It affects energy, it affects procurement, it affects everything. And I think that they will use that, or they will see that in terms of things like AI regulation, where companies will have to be much more regulated to show that they aren't using AI in any way that could possibly be biased around race or gender.
So what do you think, Rob, these new possibly coming regulations will have for the companies? Is this a good thing in terms of business and competition, or is this going to stifle innovation?
Well, I think overall it's going to stifle innovation. I think, for example, if you look at what Brussels has done in many, many of these areas, not everything. I don't oppose Europe having a privacy bill. I just oppose GDPR. The nature of it, I think, was too onerous, too restrictive on companies that want to use data in their business models. I think the Biden administration will push us in that direction, and that's going to be a problem. Now, again, if they could sort of have a nice sort of Goldilocks approach, not too hard, not too soft, things like AI regulation would be good. Things like privacy rules would be good. I worry they're going to go too far, though, and really put a lot of burden on companies that want to innovate.
And then we also finally have the question of so-called tech wars. The US opposition to using technology from China. We've talked about this with Huawei and 5G, and then we talked about it with TikTok and so on. What do you see Biden administration doing with this? Rob?
They're going to be less aggressive than the Trump administration, in my view. They will, first of all, the TikTok thing is a non-issue. It's going to go away. I don't believe the Biden administration cares about it, nor should they care about it. Huawei, we're never, ever going to buy a Huawei product as long as the communists are in control of China. We will not buy a Huawei router or 5G system in the United States. I don't think ultimately that we're going to continue the kind of unilateral and fairly draconian export controls on technology to companies like Huawei. I don't think that's what the Biden team wants to do, but I don't think they're going to walk away from it very quickly because this is an Achilles heel for them. They've been branded by some, particularly some Republicans, as weak on China, so they can't sort of roll back too much. Bottom line is there's no way the U.S. is going back to Obama days on China. We've crossed the Rubicon. We will be tough on China for, a generation, if not more, similarly like we were on the Soviet Union.
So Mårten, do you see opportunities here for Nordic companies or European companies within this whole landscape of tech wars and battles?
For Nordic companies and for European companies, always, and that's sort of the good news and the bad news. We are so small today in Europe and the Nordics that whatever we do, there's room for it. We are not hitting the ceiling or the limits of any market. The problem is that we have in Europe a lot of crappy companies, meaning companies that don't produce valuable enough services or goods, so nobody else cares about them. And if you try to sell something outside of your own home territory, whichever it is, a country or the EU, you have to build products that are truly compelling to the buyers outside. And when you do that, you can overcome all the objections that may exist in policy. And I think that's a systemic challenge we have in Europe, that the companies are not going all that last mile to make sure that their offering are compelling and bring quantum leap improvements to their customers around the world. If they did that, the opportunities are endless. And I do think there's a specific opportunity now, given the tectonic shifts and the rise of China and sort of the redefinition of the US. There's room for anybody from Europe or anywhere else. It could be Africa or South America to sort of claim a stake now, as it's a little bit unsure how the game will be played. But it requires sort of a certain entrepreneurialism and thinking big that we don't have that much of in Europe. We have some, but we don't have enough. We're boxing below our weight, and we're not doing as much as we could because we settle for something that's convenient or traditional or looks like our neighbor, and then that's good for a local market, but it's not good and strong enough for a global one.
So we really need to up our game. And with that note, I think we're running out on tech conversation. Thank you so much, Rob and Mårten. And next, we'll discuss branding. Okay, so we'll take all of this, and now we will figure out how to brand Nordic businesses in the United States. We have with us Billy McCormac, who's CEO of Miltton Sweden, so one of our own, so to speak. We have MR, who's CEO and president of Franklin Foods, and used to be ex-president of North America for Reima, the Finnish children's clothing brand, and CEO of Finlandia Cheese in the United States. And I personally can attest that every deli in New York City carries Finlandia cheese. And And then we have David Schaefer, who is a corporate storyteller and former vice president of communications at NBC Sports. And here I will let Billy lead the conversation. Over to you, Billy.
Thank you, Anu. So what we'd like to do today, together with David and with Emma, is to look at branding in the US market from basically three different perspectives: legal, regulatory, cultural, and then in terms of demography. And Emma, you and I were talking about this the other day, and I thought it was very interesting. You're based in the States, in New Jersey right now, been working at Finnish companies in the States, and you were talking about, because I was asking you, so what was the thing that surprised you the most when you got there about marketing Finnish brands towards the North American market? What was your answer there?
Thanks for having me, and thanks, Billy. So I guess the biggest surprise really is, and I know I used to live in California a long time ago, and then when I moved to New Jersey, which is right out of New York City, it's just how different the culture, not only climate, but also culture is here, and how like a different country. And in my current company, my offices are actually in Florida. It's another country, and I think from Europe we often compare, like I'm a Finn. We look at Finland versus US, but it's really United States. So it's just geographically very diverse, climate-wise very diverse, culturally, like from different planets, different legal systems in the States that give some interesting opportunities for building brands in the United States, and definitely makes the marketer need to think of who are we actually targeting. And like Mårten was saying previously today, the opportunity is big enough that you can really find your niche in this country. So I guess that would be what I would comment.
To Sweden, and if I'm not incorrect, you were based out of Florida before moving here.
Yep.
And so you haven't been here that long, but you, of course, were in the States during the last shift. And we were talking about now going from Trump to Biden. And I think that, especially a lot of people outside of the US are also looking at this change and saying, okay, well, now everything is going to be different. Just being there during the last shift, do you think that, things change that much when it comes to marketing goods and services in the North American marketplace?
We were talking about this some previously, and while at the federal level, there's obviously a big shift from a Democratic administration or to a Democratic administration from a Republican administration. But when you get down to the consumer level, how much of that change, besides the constant news cycle in buying behaviors, I doubt that. And I think it kind of turns to the scale of the U.S. market and the fact that there's so many different regions and so many different, like Emma said, almost countries with the different states. And so really that change and shift at a federal level still doesn't impact the consumers on a local level as much.
Emma, you've run a few brands there, and we were talking about that, especially when it comes to Swedish brands. It's very interesting because some have chosen to keep a very Swedish profile, a very Nordic profile when going into the American market, especially if you're thinking about Fjällräven, IKEA, and so forth. And then you have Spotify and H&M, where I'd say that probably most Americans don't even view those or even know that they are Swedish owned. What was your experience when it comes to this one in terms of running Finnish brands in North America and the name and the language factors?
Well, I think the common problem that or challenge that Scandinavian brands face when they coming to US or launching to US is that it's a huge market. They have dollar signs in their eyes for the opportunity, but then they really don't have. No one knows their name, and they don't have enough money to really market in a big way. So you need to find something that sets you apart, differentiates, makes people to notice and remember you. And one way, is really looking into the origin of the product and what are the, let's say, the strong points from that origin that you can build into your brand story here that makes you memorable and stand out and starts to build the buzz around you. And we talk about that Fjällräven, IKEA is using the Swedish naming, which is, doesn't even make sense for most Americans, but it's very memorable. I was telling to Billy, we tried the same with Reima, and it's some of the names work better, but we also noticed that some Finnish names are impossible for our salespeople to pronounce or customers to remember. So I don't know what that tells about the Finnish language versus Swedish language, but that was the point. But I think, like, in general, there is. For Scandinavian Nordic brands, there's so much strong stories to tell from where we come from that it's almost, there's almost like too much that we need to choose what is really the value we want to connect with, and what is the value that connects best with our target group here, and then build the story.
David, in our gracious host Anno's book and lectures and articles, she talks a lot about the Nordic, sort of the Nordics in the American zeitgeist. That for such small countries, we really take kind of a large amount of real estate, especially in the political discussion over the last few years, in terms of social safety nets, healthcare, schools, all these kinds of things, both positive and negative. And that's also sort of a geographical, cultural issue. So of course you've got a lot of probably people on the coasts that are very positive to things like that, and then a lot of people that are more in the kind of old Trump country in the middle of the U.S. that not too enthusiastic about the Nordic countries and see them as socialist ex-Soviet states. And that could also affect branding opportunities and marketing opportunities. So as a person who's worked with storytelling and with framing and things like that over a couple of decades, what would be your advice to Nordic companies in sort of looking at this from a Nordic perspective?
Yeah, I work with a company here in Sweden that is an AR and VR within real estate, and they've experienced this where they have projects in Miami, LA, New York, and DC on the coasts, and then they've really had some challenges in markets like Oklahoma City and Dallas. And in kind of preparing for this, saw a Technomic study, which is a research firm for food services, and it reinforces this. While my experience is anecdotal, they had research showing that international concepts for restaurants work better in the specific cities they said were Miami, LA, DC, and New York, which mirrored this company's experience. So I think there's something to be said for that, depending on the product that you're trying to market. But I also, building off of what Emma had said, I think the Scandinavian or Nordic brands really have a brand affinity with quality and functionalism and craftsmanship. And you see that with IKEA. And while people will look at IKEA and look at it as affordable furniture, it also is well made, it's smart in its design, it's functional, and without sacrificing style. And so I think that there's something to be said if your brand has those attributes, or you're selling something that the Scandinavian or Nordic branding of it, if it is a high quality product or service, that you can lean in with the Scandinavian and Nordic branding of it, and that will be received well in the U.S. market.
Mm-hmm. Emma, is this something you agree with?
Yes, definitely. So I think if I think on broad picture, what most Americans think about with Scandinavian countries, they think of beautiful nature, fjords of Norway, beautiful women, pure nature. They think of free education, good quality education, long maternity leaves, quality of life. There's a lot of positives. Thinking of the Scandinavian countries being ranked as happiest places, happiest countries on earth. I think it builds a really solid design, I would say, as well, adding Scandinavian design. And, if you think of those are really positive values to build the brand and, tell the story. And I think in these times that people are, clearly with the not only the political crisis, but we have the racial injustice, and we have the climate change, and we have COVID crisis. So it's like crisis on top of crisis, and people are looking for brands that can offer them connection and something to relate to their values. And I think in Scandinavia we have so much positive that people can find in these troubled times that they can connect to, that it's actually for marketers like an amazing opportunity to build something that really touches the hearts of people.
David, you mentioned a study previously. I noticed in that study that they talked about a lot of the legal and regulatory frameworks that people don't think about before entering into the American marketplace, which is, I mean, I think they gave an example that a restaurant that might take, a month to build in South Korea could take upwards of 9 months to build in the States due to all of the regulatory hoops that you have to jump through and permits and everything like that. I just wonder if you could both sort of speak to sort of understanding and navigating that legal and regulatory topography as very, very key to succeeding. We'll start with you, David.
I mean, I think there is something to be said again, that the levels of regulation with federal, state, and then even local, and navigating that. And I know from businesses that, when we at NBC Sports had brick and mortar instruction facilities being built across the US, we really had to look at not just one set of regulations in order to operate those facilities, but really diving deep into each local store and local instruction facility, what the regulations were there. I think the COVID crisis is another example that exemplifies that confusion. Is the regulations there were getting pushed down to the local and state level, and there were a lot of fights even within the same state. I was in Florida. Some cities were trying to do things, and at the state level they had policies, and then at the national level. So there was a lot of conflict where we lived in a town that if you drove 2 miles down the road, you crossed into a new county, and there were totally different regulations. And COVID obviously didn't pay attention to county lines.
Emma, anything you'd like to add on that about the importance of doing your due diligence when it comes to the legal?
Well, I've always felt that if you're doing business in the US, you need a good attorney working next to you. So, and sometimes you need several of them. You need like special expert attorneys in certain fields. But I certainly recommend having a solid legal counsel because the legal system is different than European. It is the regulatory, but also it allows people to try to take advantage of companies that are not, haven't done their due diligence. And that could go in the wrong way unless you get the right legal advice. So that's really the number one thing doing business in the US: get a good attorney.
I may jump in. I think we're starting to run out of time, and of course that's a perfect ending to a conversation in the US. Do you want to, Billy, close your conversation? Did you have a final comment?
No, but I mean, I think it's been very very interesting, and of course speaking with David and Emma, and then listening to the previous conversations, I think it really hammers home the point that despite that some changes have been made at the federal level, that a lot of the power centers remain at the state, county, and local levels, especially when it comes to companies understanding the local and navigating the local topography of the U.S. But it's going to be interesting to follow what's going on over the next 2 years at least.
Thank you so much, Billy, Emma, and David. And thank you to our audience for joining us. The Miltton Futures events will continue. We'll have them regularly, so please check your email box for invitations. And at Nordic West office, we will keep looking at international developments. Thank you so much for joining us.